Hey guys, Edre here. Today I'm going to do a brand new album review. Well, the album is already kind of about a week old, but I'm going to be reviewing the new Yungblud album, Weird. This is the second album from the alternative English singer, and a bit of background like I do with all my reviews. Yungblud I've always had mixed feelings on. I've always felt that a lot of his material has come across much more shallow than I think it has been intended to be, and oftentimes can even come across a bit generic. But at the same time, I do feel like he has always been a promising artist that has a pretty well crafted sound up to this point, and for the most part, I've been relatively indifferent on him. I've never really loved him too much, and never really have yet to be really impressed. But on his new studio album, Weird, he sort of is a little all over the place. Well, this album overall does follow through with a very consistent sound. There's a lot of genre experimenting within it, which is something I usually don't have too much of an issue with. There's a lot of great albums that do this that I like quite a bit, especially over the past few years. Albums like Notes on a Conditional Form, some of the material that artists like Post Malone have been doing. I think those are artists that have executed bringing other genres into their sound much better than Yungblud does on this album. However, the first thing that really did stick out to me about the album Weird, and I think this is really the main focus of the album, is from a lyrical standpoint. A lot of the songs are very personal, very emotional, and that is something that I think many people have come to expect from Yungblud. But I just feel like he even hammers it home even more on this album. I feel like a lot of it was written during 2020, which also might be part of the reason. While songs like Mars really do tell a very inspiring teen story that I think is some of the best lyrics on the album, many of the lyrics across the board, though, outside of the song Mars, oftentimes still feel relatively shallow, and it's kind of disappointing because I could tell that a lot of these are written from a very passionate, very heartfelt place, but a lot of times I just feel like the way they are written and the tracks they are being written over kind of sucks away much of the life from the tracks and ends up leaving me feel once again relatively indifferent. I don't feel like many of these songs are written so bad to the point where I have the urge to skip them, but I do feel like there's a lot of tracks on here that are written very standard, very kind of just like basic, to the point where they don't really leave anything that impactful. I think the type of songs that really leave the biggest impact lyrically are some of the more ballady acoustic tracks, such as Love Song and It's Quiet in Beverly Hills. These tend to be much better, composed tracks as well. I just feel like overall, some of the slower songs really do show some of his more vulnerable side a bit more, not his really edgy side. It shows a deeper part of Yungblud that we don't usually get exposed to, and I think that a lot of times the acoustic tracks end up coming off much better than some of the more hyped up songs. However, I do feel like It's Quiet in Beverly Hills ends up sounding like this album's good riddance time of your life. You could interpret that as a good thing or a bad thing. I just interpret it as that. Vocally, it's worth talking about here because he is a vocalist at the end of the day. He proves to be a much more diverse vocalist than I originally expected. He knows when to tone it down, he knows when to dial it up as well. But on many of the tracks here, it seems like he's just emulating some of his contemporaries and some of his influences, and it doesn't really feel that unique in a lot of spots. That's not necessarily the biggest criticism, because I do think that his voice itself is okay. I think that he's an alright singer, and I think that I don't have too much complaints with his overall voice, except for the fact that sometimes the way he sings on certain tracks just sounds a little too close to other artists. And for example, the song Cotton Candy, he sounds a lot like the 1975's Maddie Healy here. And I know that they are both British, they have similar accents, but it just sounds a little too close. Like some of the he puts emphasis on certain parts of the words that are very similar to how Maddie Healy does it, and it's hard to tell if that was intentional or not, but it's definitely something I caught on to. The song itself, Cotton Candy, to me was a cushiony pop hit that just sounds like Yungblud tried using the formula that Post Malone did on Circles. And except the main difference here is that Circles, in my opinion, is a very well-crafted pop song, and Cotton Candy really isn't. Vocally, he also seems to really take a lot of influence from Liam Gallagher from Oasis on a lot of songs, such as Ice Cream Man. I feel like his voice on a lot of these songs, once again, it makes sense why he would sound like them because he is British, but it just sometimes during certain parts sounds a bit too intentional, especially when he's singing over some tracks that clearly have Britpop influence. This isn't a huge negative, though. I mean, he's still a talented singer, and I think he's an alright vocalist. It's just, there are many spots where I feel like he doesn't really sound like himself. He doesn't sound that unique. He mainly sounds like his influences. One of the songs I want to take some time to cover, and one of the things that really opens up this and about the more musical side of it, is this album opens up with a very anthemic and very theatrical Teresa, which kind of starts off by being some sort of lullaby type song, and then somehow transitions into what seems like Yungblud's attempt at making a Black Parade era My Chemical Romance track. The music stylings here, the structure, the way it's laid out. So even some of the progressions and very big, theatrical production just sounds like if it was reworked into a pop punk song, it could have easily been an outtake from the Black Parade sessions. Not sure if I'm too crazy about that. I wish he was a bit more unique there. Musically though, there is there's a pretty consistent tone throughout this album. I do feel like it has a very standard modern alternative sound, and I don't really think that it's anything that unusual. I mean, I've heard this sort of new alternative sound done by dozens of artists already this year, and I don't really feel like he does much to really make himself stand out. However, there is a bit of Britpop influence on some of these tracks, such as Mars, which is kind of the equivalent to a 90s Britpop Oasis anthem in many ways. The way it's laid out, the way it's structured as well, feels a lot like it could be easily reworked into one of those 90s like Oasis, big ballady type anthem songs. And one of the songs that really stuck out to me as being a very interesting instrumental was the song Superdeadfriends. Vocally I could care less for the song. I feel like he went a bit overboard on the vocals here with the screaming / even rapping and very distorted vocals. In many ways it takes away from the song, but I do think that the more industrial instrumental on the song Superdeadfriends was one of the more interesting parts, one of the more interesting musical choices I think on this album for sure. And then towards the end of this album we get hit with maybe one of the worst songs on this album, Acting Like That, with Machine Gun Kelly. This song feels like a direct outtake from Tickets to My Downfall, Machine Gun Kelly's horrible album he put out earlier this year. And it's one of the most obnoxious moments on this album. It sounds like it's directly pulled from there. It doesn't even sound like a Yungblud track. It just sounds like a Machine Gun Kelly track with Yungblud as the feature. And it's just one of the most obnoxious choruses on this album as well. I just don't feel like a song like this is necessary in the slightest. I just think it was a big mistake. I wish the song was not on the album. And the last thing I'm going to cover is the production. I feel like the production really does suffer from a lot of what a lot of modern alternative albums suffer from, as well as when a lot of pop artists go more rock. Suffers from a lot of those same things. The heavy compression, the super polished production, and all that. Well, in theory, it's well produced, and it is a pretty solid production. It doesn't fit this style of music all the time. I mean, some of the tracks come across a bit better. But there's nothing inherently unique about this production, or that great about this production, that really makes it stand out amongst anything. And it just makes him sound like all of his alternative contemporaries, which is something kind of disappointing, because I did think Yungblud did stick out a little bit amongst some of his contemporaries. But after listening to a lot of this album and the way it's been produced, and even some of the deep cuts on this thing, I think it sounds a lot like your standard modern alternative album, and that's not necessarily a compliment. But at the end of the day, I wasn't left totally despising this album. I was left at the end of the day feeling like it was alright. So, what are my overall thoughts? How do I plan on rating such a project? Well, not Machine Gun Kelly, Yungblud, for the most part, kind of did the kind of album I was expecting. And for the most part, I wasn't left dissatisfied. I was just kind of left wishing that he did a little more. I was hoping that he would have gone a little further. I was hoping that there would have been more songs that were very captivating. But at the end of the day, most of this album was, I think, your very standard modern alternative. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, and I don't think it was executed poorly, I just wish, Yungblud went a little further. That being said, I have settled on giving Weird a strong 5 out of 10. Anybody that doesn't know my reviews needs to know anything above a 5 is good, anything below is bad. So a 5 is about as average as it gets. I was left relatively indifferent on this album. I could take it or leave it. I was hoping for more, but I was not really that disappointed either. So with all that being said, that is it for now. And I just want to let everybody know that this is a very casual channel. Don't take anything I say too seriously. Take everything I say with a giant grain of salt. That is it for now, and goodbye.